I have to say, today I feel some fear and trepidation as I approach the topic of evil and narcissism. I know I've advertised a lot about it. I want to set some ground rules. I know I'm going to repeat it a lot as people join us, but people are right now starting to come into this live. But one of the ground rules for this topic is that we're going to be approaching it from a Judeo-Christian viewpoint, and that I don't want it to be a place where we attempt to evangelize or prove people right, but rather that we're going to have a philosophical discussion about evilness and narcissism, and try to talk about mental health issues from a philosophical, existential, or a religious standpoint. I know it's kind of tricky, and I know people have, the reason I don't do this is because people have very strong opinions, and everybody, of course, thinks that they're right. And not that I'm not saying they're not right, but I just say that it ends up being not productive. And I don't want this to be a non-productive experience. I want this to be productive. So I want to kind of challenge us from a standpoint of, like I said, this is from a Judeo-Christian viewpoint, which may not align with yours, and that's perfectly fine. But I'd like to take a standpoint of standing back and looking at our concept of evil, like what does evil actually even mean? And then talk about it. What does it mean to be evil in a relationship, or to perpetuate evil on the world? How do we make sure that we as individuals aren't guilty of this? Because I don't want to just point fingers at narcissists and say toxic people are bad and people who are not toxic or dysfunctional aren't bad, because the truth of the matter is we all have some toxicity. We all at times are dysfunctional. So there is no such thing as us pointing a finger at somebody without us having three fingers pointing back at us. We're always pointing at ourselves. So it's, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Kerry Kerr McAvoy. I'm a psychologist with over 20 years of counseling experience. This is something I've thought a lot about. For those of you who may not be aware, that I've actually written 3 devotionals. They've been published, where I've looked from a Christian standpoint, where I look closely at the relationship of Christ and how he actually is the perfect therapist or the perfect psychologist. And then I also looked at one devotional was spent looking at pain. It's called Pain as a Starting Point. I've repackaged it and call it Never Forgotten. So I'm not new to the idea of psychology, the intersection of psychology and faith. This is something that I have had some experience with. It's something I feel kind of uncomfortable with, because I don't see myself as a model Christian. And actually, in the last few years, I've been deconstructing my faith a lot. My faith has been going through an evolutionary process. And if you read my book, Love You More, you know that I am certainly not a model Christian. I mean, the book is riddled with places that you could say where I myself it had some moral failure. And so that I feel very tender around this topic, because I know myself cannot withstand scrutiny from the outside of having a perfectly moral life. But with that said, let's try to launch into this topic of evil and narcissism. And again, for those who are joining me, because I just saw my numbers balloon on TikTok, it's not going to be about evangelism. And this is not going to be an effort to say which faith is right. And I'm going to be coming at it from a standpoint of a Judeo-Christian viewpoint. And if you differ from that, that's fine. It still could be an interesting discussion, because we're going to stand back and talk about a philosophical, existential, religious standpoint. So to get into what is evil, I think it's really important that we first define what is evil, and have some kind of like foundational understanding of where I'm coming from. Maybe, again, you might not agree with my definition of evil, but a Christian standpoint would be say it's an absence of God. Okay, well, what does that mean? Absence of God, especially if you're agnostic or atheist, you'd say, well, I don't believe God exists. So what's that? So that's not really a bad thing. So what's that absence of? The Bible says clearly that God is love. So let's say, for the sake of this discussion, that evil is at the absence of love. I think that's something we can all agree, that love, having compassion, showing empathy for the world, sensitivity to other people, seeing other people as existing in your realm, and acknowledging their humanity, seeing them as instrumental, as their needs, rights, feelings, emotions as meaningful and informational and as important, showing compassion for that. I would say that's love, so that we don't act in a vacuum. So whatever needs that I'm thinking of that are my own, I would consider how that would work for the rest of the world. That may mean that if when it comes to, I wouldn't steal, and maybe I'm hungry, but it doesn't mean I necessarily would steal from my neighbor, even though I was hungry and they have something out sitting out that looks like it's there for the taking. That may mean that I would consider my neighbor's rights, their feelings, and then act in the best interest of both of us. And that would be, yes, I'm hungry, but I'd also act in the best interest of my neighbors, which is to not take something that doesn't belong to me. I would see that as loving. So yes, John said, evil is the absence of God. But for the sake of God, for those that don't know what that means, that God says he is love, right? He is all things loving. He is love. He is the attribute love. So for those of us who believe in that, then we would say evil is the absence of love. I'm just trying to keep it super simple, because we would then get into this big discussion of what is God. And I think that's way too complicated and way outside the scope of this discussion. So it would be the absence of love. So if you look at it from that standpoint, and if you also, for those of you who then go back to the Bible and look at what they have to say about evil, it says that evil is there's a personified sense of evil, which is identified as Satan or Lucifer, and that is the father of lies. Isn't that interesting? That Lucifer, whether or not you believe that there is a personified sense of evil, in other words, is a person of evil, or whether evil is just sort of a manifestation of selfishness or lack of consideration for other human beings other than yourself, that it's based and rooted on lies. So then when you take that standpoint, then it then begins to say, well, that's interesting. So it's showing a lack of love, which is a lack of empathy. And it's also based on deception, or a lack of concern or for the truth, not telling the truth, which is deception, which then when you get to, is that narcissism? That is the basis of narcissism. So then we begin to say, you think of this as like a logical argument, then are all narcissists evil? Well, interestingly enough, we can argue that actually all of humanity, which is the root of Christianity, would say that all humanity falls short of God, falls short of love, and that we all need redemption. So that, yes, we all have a struggle with that, but some of us are struggling way more than others of us. And so that the behavior of narcissist in itself could be seen as evil. I just finished the book, Glimpses of the Devil by M. Scott Peck. If you aren't familiar with him, he's now deceased, but he was a psychiatrist. He got famous for writing the book, The Road Less Traveled, and then he followed up with several other books, and one of them was called People of the Lie. When he wrote People of the Lie, he didn't believe that Satan existed. He just thought that there were people who were deceptive and weren't loving, and he called them people of the lie, meaning that they lived in a egocentric world that's callous to the needs of other people, and that they're about deception. So he kind of talked about evil from a global standpoint. But then he revised it when he got involved with a couple exorcisms, and Glimpses of the Devil is actually a recorded version, a document of his 2 case studies of exorcisms. When he exorcised 2 women, one was named Jersey and the other one's called Becca. And it's a fascinating look, because one he was successful with and one he was not. And he kind of outlines the whole process, the interview process, his diagnostic workup, how he determined they were possessed, and then why he felt one succeeded and one failed. It's really, really interesting. And by the way, for those of you who I don't like scary stuff, it's not scary. He wrote it like a clinician. So if you're looking for a nice case study of possession that, according to him, he believes is real, I think that it's fascinating. It's a fascinating look at that. And yeah, Lacey, I can definitely put that into the group if you're interested. And like I said, it is not scary. It's not like trying to read The Exorcist, which is, I won't read, frankly. I just don't want to be terrified that much. But I found it really, really interesting. So what does it mean? So I'm going to start opening it for discussion, but I just want to kind of lay the groundwork for those of you who are just joining. I'm Dr. Kerry McAvoy. I'm a licensed psychologist with over 20 years of counseling experience. And today we're talking about, are narcissists evil, or are they just sick? And how do we know the difference between the two? And then here's even a more important question. Does it actually matter? Does it actually really matter? Because I think that whatever framework that you come from, as a psychologist, I would sit with people that I think, yeah, they're pretty evil, But then I hear that was not my job to pray for them in the counseling room. I mean, they came to me for mental health services. So I provided mental health services. And at the end of the day, did it matter how we got there, whether they were prayed over and had like deliverance versus whether or not they had insight, psychological insight, and also made maybe behavioral changes, and it led to profound changes in their life? Did it really matter how they got to where they got, as long as the end result were that they were living better with themselves? So I think that becomes an even more pertinent issue is, does any of this matter? I know a lot of us like to attach the label of evil to narcissistic people. And for those of you who read my book, Love You More, I'm thinking where the copy of it is, you know that what I encountered was someone horrible. I believe at the end of I'm going to ruin the book for you if you haven't read it. I got to find a copy of it so you can see it. I'm going to ruin the end of the book. And I tell you in the epilogue, here's the book, this is what it looks like. I tell you in the epilogue that I believe the entire marriage, which occurred 6 years ago. So this happened recently. So I was widowed. So I was married in a very long-term relationship for 31 years. I knew the guy 33 years. He died of cancer. And I ended up in the worst relationship possible. I felt like, I don't know why, maybe if you want to say God needed to help me be humbled or to show me that I was not healed, but I picked the person who was the epitome of my trauma, the epitome that was always wrong with everything in my life and my family and everything I've ever known. And for those of you who followed me know that I have had psychopathic people in my life. It runs in my family. So I've lived around those types of people, but I picked somebody who was stepped out of the worst. You put all the worst characteristics of my extended family, you slammed it into this person, and this is who I met and married. And I go ahead and tell you at the end that he targeted me. He knew I was a widow, and he believed widows had life insurances and that we had money. And unfortunately, that is a truth that a lot of dating apps you have to really watch out for. And he targeted widows. He told me he was targeting widows. And that I believe that I discovered that the whole thing was a con, that he and another person had set me up to take my money and that they were trying to poison me. So I certainly experienced horrific evil in that relationship. But as you read the story, you hear I'm long suffering. I give him a lot of chances. I believe stuff that I shouldn't believe. And, of course, that's all about why I talk about cognitive dissonance and the importance of a betrayal bond or a trauma bond. All the things that happened to us. I didn't know I was being gaslit that heavily. I mean, all the things that happened to victims certainly happened to me in the book. And being a psychologist didn't prevent it from happening to me, didn't give me some special insight. I know people seem to think that somehow we should see through all of this, but I didn't. And most of us wouldn't. And I actually know other psychologists who've contacted me who are being abused or have been abused, and they didn't see it either. So because we have this education doesn't mean that we have any special information about what it looks like in toxic relationships. I think that this education that's happening here on the social media platforms, what we're doing here together right now, is the edge of training. Unfortunately, should not be occurring here, should be occurring in the universities. But I think this is the leading edge of training that's happening, of informing all of us what predatory behavior looks like. For some reason, culture, society, the world hasn't bothered to educate us on how to spot dangerous people. And I didn't know how to spot it either. And I didn't know how to get out of it once I was in the middle of it. So I say all that to say, yes, that was terrible evil, definitely terrible evil. And it affected me, cost me a lot. It cost you a lot. A lot of you have cost. I know you guys have lost time. You've lost money. You've lost your health. Maybe you've lost relationships. Maybe you're losing connection with important family members, but it has cost you a lot. These relationships cost you a lot. Is that evil? Yes, I think that's evil. So let's get into it. I'm going to open it up. Whatever you guys want to say, I'd love to hear. So here's some questions you can answer for me. Do you think it matters if we identify this as evil? What do you think evil is? I'd love to hear what your opinion on that is. And what do you think is the best way forward in treating the problem of narcissism as a culture, not necessarily as individuals, because we don't have control over sending people to therapy, can't force change, so we can't make that different. But I would love to know how you think this helps as a culture. What can we do about it as a culture? So Madame said, mine called me evil 2 weeks in and blocked me. He still has my stuff at his place and he hasn't put it together since January. Sounds like that sounds really awful. It sounds like that you've been really affected. Why do you think he called you, or she, or he called you, it's he, because you did say that, he called you evil? I'd be curious to hear why you think that happened. Oh, I'm glad, full co-power, that it helps that I gave the suggestions. Like I said, I don't want this to become about who's right. We're not going to determine that. But I do think it's very interesting to talk about. And you all have brought it up over and over to me. Here's another question I have for you. How does it help you to label it as evil? I just heard another large creator say that she's decided, she has an awful story too. I mean, maybe not as quite as bad as mine, but is about as bad as mine. And she said she's decided to forgive and release her perpetrator, the person who offended her, hurt her. She's decided to have compassion for and to forgive. And in fact, she even did a follow-up. I asked on the video, what does it mean to be compassionate and forgiving? Because I think we throw those terms around and I'm not for sure I agree with her definition. So I want to know what she meant. And she went ahead and made a video answering me and said she believes that it is wishing well, seeing it as the person's brokenness, that we're all part of a broken society and broken people, and just seeing it as, they made a mistake, I make mistakes, let's move forward. Now, I don't personally like that. I disagree strongly with that. To me, there's nothing about what mine did to me that was just based on broken history. It wasn't based on trauma. This guy was predatory. I think anybody who lost all of their retirement to Bernie Madoff doesn't feel like that was just Bernie's trauma. I think Bernie was predatory. So I feel like that's just kind of like, I don't know, sprinkling fairy dust on something and hoping that it just makes us all feel better. And can we just sort of hold hands and sing Kumbaya together? And I don't like that. No, it doesn't work for me. But I also, though, I get her bigger point, and her bigger point is that she doesn't want to be, ruined with bitterness and resentfulness. She doesn't want to have the lack of forgiveness destroy her life because she's sitting there fretting about why this person did what he did to her, which, by the way, in her story, he faked his name, faked that he was single, faked that they had a relationship, moved in with her for 2 years, and then just disappeared like he died. She actually thought he died. She goes looking for him and finds out that he was actually married and had another life, that he just stepped out of that other life and had a life with her. Yes, that's super shitty. I agree. Super awful. But do I think it was his trauma that made him do that, for live 2 years? Fool his wife. I don't even know what his wife thought, but fool her to thinking that they had a relationship when they didn't. I don't know. Yeah, so Real Babo says, I think if we're not going to take on a platform of our own, we can support people who, like you, who are, and these videos are what got me through. I'm glad to hear that's what it got you through. I wish I could see that. I need to lift that screen up so I can see it better. There you go. Just move it, Kerry. It's very simple. So some of you are saying, I don't find that just having compassion and forgiveness for people makes what they've done to us easier. So it comes back to let me ask you again, how does labeling what a person's done evil help you? I would love to know that. How has labeling what the person's done to you evil helped you? Yeah, I agree. The book People a Lie is about humans' evilness, which is about narcissism. Yes, Nico. And in fact, I've been using M. Scott Peck's material as the basis for even this discussion. I do agree. I think he's outstanding. I think there's other really great people who also write about this, but I think M. Scott Peck is particularly in a unique position because he's a psychiatrist who also has the intersection of faith. And I think that's fascinating. Yeah. Yeah, so Cynthia said, I don't want my abuser to control every aspect of my life. And that means by holding on to anger. That's how I view it too. I do agree, user, that there's a disconnect between these people and that they don't care. They don't care. So is someone evil because they did something evil? Billy asks. I think we all do evil, Billy. So I think all of us have the potential to be evil. But what M. Scott Peck says, and I agree, and I also think the Bible agrees with this as well, is that it's the giving of oneself over to it, to where it is not in conflict with your moral code. That's what he said it was different about the possessions, was that there was a part of the person who resisted the compliance of evil, the submission to evil, and as a result, they had not completely given themselves over. Yes, these two people in his book of Glimpses of the Devil, we're talking about M. Scott Peck's book about demon possession called Glimpses of the Devil. Both of them have done evil things in the book. He describes what they did, but they had not fully given themselves over to them. I would say what's unique about my ex claimed, interestingly enough, my ex claimed to hear voices. He believed that they were demons. He told me that multiple times. He felt that he was struggling with real demons, spiritual demons. And the more I stood back from him, this is just me, my observation. When I stand back and kind of look at him, he had completely given himself over to what he was doing. He had no conflict other than whenever I was in conflict with his behavior. No conflict with, in other words, the deceptions that he was doing, the misleading he was practicing, the exploitation, the predatory behavior of stalking somebody, grooming them for sexual exploitation. No conflict with with cheating on me, wanting monogamy from me, but not giving me monogamy when I wasn't even a willing participant, that I had no knowledge of it. None of that was in anything that he had any moral compunctions about. All of that was something he completely, you know how I'm saying, you know how, like, say, for example, there's something you know that you shouldn't do, but you want to do, but you know you shouldn't do, and you sit and you wrestle with yourself. That would say we're battling with evilness within ourselves. But some of us don't. Some of us just, like, we justify it, or we believe we're entitled to it, or we believe that the purpose of it serves our ends, and that's all that it needs. To me, that's giving ourselves over to it. And then at that point, then I think that we're in compliance with it. Yeah, Debbie's asking a very fascinating question, and she said, isn't that then the id? So Freud divided our sense of ego, our sense of self. He wouldn't use the ego. He would say our sense of self into three pieces. The three pieces are id, which is there at birth. It's like the infant that says, I want, I want, I want. It just demands. It has no impulse control, and it wants whatever it wants, regardless of the cost, when it wants it. Then what happens really quickly is you develop a parental part, which he calls the superego, which is the part of you that acts like the parent, like the strict, harsh parent that kind of comes in and controls and sort of disciplines us and has puts restraints on us, acts like the police officer within us. And then over time, as we mature, we get the third part, which he calls the ego. And that part sort of stands in the middle and says, well, it's good to want things, but we want to want them reasonably. And yeah, moral code's really important, but it shouldn't be a taskmaster who's ruthless and harsh. It needs to have some softness and have grace with it, so it sort of stands in between and sort of moderates all of that. So isn't what we often talk about is the id? Well, this comes back to what you made a really good point, and that is why Judeo-Christian would say, well, we're all born evil, that the id is by nature riddled with sin, needing saving, and that part of what happens with socialization. So whether or not you view it from Christianity or not, with socialization, we cap it. We sort of say, no, it's not okay to lie as a little baby, as little kids. No, it's not okay to take what you want when you want it. No, it's not okay to hit your brother or sister because you're mad at them. They learn civilization and learn to behave. So yes, you could say that narcissism, developmental psychologists would say narcissists are stuck at a roughly about 15 months to 18 months year old development-wise, emotionally. I don't know if that shocks you. They're not even a 3-year-old. 3-year-old shows a little more restraint than some of them show. They're actually developmentally roughly around 15 to 18 months old. And there's arguments about roughly when, but we think it's before the autonomous stage. There's a big kind of crisis in identity when we go through, and they would say, well, it's happening around that stage, somewhere up to 2 years old, somewhere in there, they're emotionally arrested. You're seeing now, bioneurology would say, no, it's deficits. They have neurological deficits, and the MRI imaging shows these deficits. You can actually look at the brain structure and see certain areas of the brain are under functioning and certain areas of the brain are over functioning. And then you have other people say, well, it's attachment problems. It's because they didn't have really good parenting and they came from these really rough homes. Now, but unfortunately, that's true for most of us. So why does some of us come out this way and not every one of us? That's why trauma theory we tend to toss out, because it just doesn't work. You can't say, because 80+% of us have histories of trauma, but not 80% plus of us are narcissistic. It just doesn't, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. The correlation's not there. There is some genetic component. You can say, well, this is, some people say it's generational curses. Other people say, well, it's just genetics. There's definitely a strong genetic component to narcissism, definitely. Twins raised apart show 70% of them have narcissism. One twin has narcissism, the other twin has narcissism 70% of the time. So it certainly is. Yes, I do know, Kerry, that our brains change by trauma, and that's another question. We know that too. We know that. I don't know if all of you realize that, but what happens in those early years of development in your environment, if you're not like stimulated enough and people aren't talking to you and they aren't relating to you, you're actually having neurological deficits that happen. So they could say, well, the neurological deficits explained by the fact of early childhood deprivation, except for you've got that genetic piece, which is also happening too. That's why most of us lately are saying it's a biosocial problem, meaning there is a component that's genetic and there's a component environmental, and we exactly don't understand how these two relating or interacting are causing the problem, but they're both. It's a both and problem. It's a both and problem. So I'm reading a lot of your comments right now. So yeah, it's a tough topic. I think this, for me, labeling something evil gives me some comfort, because then I can say it was wrong. It's my way of saying what this person did was a violation of me, a terrible, terrible violation of me. I think that's, but it doesn't do much more than that for me. It doesn't help me correct it. It doesn't give me any tools to sort of where to go with it. It just, there's where it kind of sits. It's like, yeah, evil exists. I have my own propensity to do evil too. I mean, I have to include myself in that ratio. And I was wrong, horribly wrong. But I don't feel like it helps me more than that, other than just say there is wrong in the world. And I got caught in it. Yeah, Janine said it helps to understand. It does. It does help to understand. Curiosity, I agree. Attachment problems do make people lash out, but I also think lots of other things make people lash out. I don't think there was an article I read in graduate school. It was, the title of it, I don't know exactly what the title, but basically was, why did Van Gogh cut off his ear? And then you read this whole article that talks about all these possible theoretical understandings, psychological theoretical understandings of why Van Gogh actually would cut off his own ear. And the end of the upshot of the whole thing was, we'll never fully know. There's lots of reasons why people do what they do. There's not one reason that any of us do. Think about even why you guys have kids. There's lots of reasons why you had kids. There wasn't one driving force that caused you to have kids. It was because maybe your time in your life, you didn't want to miss out because everybody else was doing it, because you wanted to have generations to pass on forward, because you were ready to give something of yourself out, maybe because it seemed like the thing to do. I mean, there's lots of reasons why we do what we do. So it's not just because of trauma. It's not just because of a dysfunctional home, not just because we had modeling of parents who did this. There's tons of reasons why we do it. That's why, to me, it makes me, I feel a little crazy making when we want to say it's this thing. I wish it was, because frankly, most of the things we throw out as the problem are fixable. But this isn't a fixable problem. I don't see it. I think there's a lot of things that have to change for us to fix this. I mean, it's not just simply making parents be better parents. I wish it was. We certainly need to attend to that. It's not simply not having single parents. We certainly can do more about that. It's not simply poverty. We can certainly do more about that. It's a whole lot of things, And part of it is, and here's the thing that I notice as a content creator on this platform, is sometimes we just like to be mean. Exactly. Dr. May said that. I was thinking of free will. Exactly. Some of it is just that we in ourselves like to be mean, and we like to sometimes just have our thumb on somebody else. I certainly experience that as a content creator when somebody makes a comment about the fact that I wear a wig, or about my age, or about something unreal, or maybe even I make an informative content about just being narcissistic, and they say I must be the narcissist to be even saying that. Why spend the energy and the time to sit there and type with your little finger when you're going to make errors and to make sure you post it? Well, because you just want to hurt somebody today, because it just makes you feel a little bit better. So I think some of us are just, it's just where we're at. And we don't talk about that either. We don't talk about the fact that sometimes we just want to be mean, Do I think it's more prevalent now than it was 30 to 50 years ago? That's a great question. I can speak, I started practicing, so I'm 61. I started practicing in my late 20s. So I've had 30 years. Yeah, 30 years to see that. It was certainly present in that. We weren't very good. We have to remember that part of the problem is that it wasn't until 1980 in the DSM-3 that narcissistic personality disorder was identified. Now, that didn't mean it showed up for the first time. It showed up, it's always been there. We can go back in time and look at people who are narcissistic. For example, Hitler was very narcissistic. They also had a lot of psychopathy, I can't say that word today, psychopathy, and he was also extremely paranoid. So I would say he was a mix of personality disorders. I think that I'm not for sure it's on the rise. I think we're better identifying it, but I'm not for sure that we're on the rise. It's on the rise. I do know that there have been studies looking at the impact of social media on younger people. The fact that we spend time looking at our images and posting photos of ourselves and like trying to record our life through outward, that seems to be causing more symptoms of narcissism. But is it actually real signs of narcissism? I'm not for sure. I'm not for sure the millennials, for example, which is the ages of my sons, because so they were born pretty much with the internet. I'm not for sure they're more narcissistic than I'm at the end of a boomer age. I'm not for sure they're any more narcissistic. I just think we're better at seeing it. Much, much better at seeing it. Yeah, Amanda, I am so sorry. Your story is really hard. I'm sorry to hear that. So Amanda's sharing that she was terribly physically abused, and that, that narcissism is evil. But you're also a great case study of that you did not turn out narcissistic. Your trauma, your severe trauma didn't make you a bad person. Like we keep saying hurt people, hurt people. Well, yeah, true, but also hurt people don't always hurt people. Sometimes, one of the things, I don't often share this. To me, it's not something I think is worth saying, but I want to go ahead and say it. I stepped out of my life and I'm out of my history determined to make sure everyone around me would experience everything that I have not had. That's been my goal. I live without a lack of a lot of support. I've lived without a lack of encouragement. I've lived without a lack of clear direction. I've had to I was financially emancipated really young. I have lived deliberately to say, I want you to have from me what I have lived without, because to me, that's been my life goal. I think for a lot of us who've experienced huge deprivations and huge abuses, we've stepped out determined to be different and determined that our corner of the world is to listen to this Brown's trio. It says, brighten the corner where you are. I was determined when I listened to that as a little child that I would go forward into my life and brighten my corner where I was. I would not perpetuate the darkness that I lived in. And I think a lot of us have done that. A lot of us. I know, for example, Heather, who's on here. If you guys are not following Heather Coleman-Voss, please do. She's got a great platform. She's also another large creator. She's done the same. She's come out of very hard places. Thank you, Heather. And she's made sure she is perpetuating light and goodness out of the darkness that she's experienced. A lot of us do that. So that's why I come back to, it is not, see, predatory people want us to see their behavior as sad and as pitiful and pathetic and out of brokenness, because then we don't hold them responsible. To me, that's even the worst evil. We want to talk about evil. To me, that's really evil, because then I see that as they're justifying, they're excusing their behavior And you know what? There's a lot of us that could excuse our behavior. I have lots of reasons to go out there and be a real shit to people because of what I've suffered. But I don't, because it's not who I want to be. It's not what I want to put out in my corner of the world. So we need to stop excusing toxic behavior. They're not victims. Narcissists and psychopaths and sociopaths are not victims. For the most part, they're aware they're hurting and harming people, and they don't care. They think they're different. They think they're above it. So yes, we are not them. We work to be different than them. We could be like them, but we work to be different than them. For whatever reasons and whyever it's there, we work to be different than them. And thank you so much for sharing that. This has been an incredible discussion. How are you guys feeling? I want to circle back. I know some of you are asking about treatment questions. I do, by the way, am launching a group coaching sessions, 12 weeks. It is helping you heal. It's helping you heal from narcissistic abuse. It starts the end of this month. It's Thursday nights. It's with me live for 12 weeks. You can check out the link in my bio about that. I will make sure the link in the live notes on YouTube is about that. So that may be something you want. And if you have financial need and you want to talk to me about it, I can make some allowances for that. So please don't let the finances hold you back from doing this. Please don't. So make sure to check. It's called Healed and Empowered. I want all of us to be healed and empowered. So that will be something that's happening starting August 31st. So please check it out for those of you who are struggling. But I want to circle back then. What do we do with the pain that we have suffered? Because I think this is so important, and we're coming down the last 15 minutes of this. So what do we do with the pain that we have? Hi, Becky. What do we do with the fact that we've been affected? Because I don't think that it is just having compassion, which to me is buying into the victimization of narcissists and the victimization of psychopaths and sociopaths. I don't believe that's the way through this. I think it's something so let me tell you what I'm doing, how I found peace. Because to me, to stay stuck on this gives them power over me, and they're still controlling me, and I don't want that happening. And I don't want that happening for you either. I don't want them to have one iota of control over you today at all. I want you completely free. To me, it feels like we've been prisoners, and I want us all set free. I feel very strongly about that. So I think a critical piece is to know that something terribly wrong happened to you. Something terribly wrong happened to you, and it was evil. But here's the critical piece. For you to then wish and want this other person to pay for that and look for them to sort of have karmic payback, to me, keeps you still a prisoner to them. You're still feeling controlled by them. Even you being afraid to speak your truth is being controlled by them. When I wrote the book, Love You More, I was terrified to tell you what actually happened in that story, what actually even happened in the bedroom. That was the part that was the hardest for me, which is still fun, I have to say. People claim that I stayed because he was no, he was not good. There was nothing good about what happened in that relationship. No, but if I can't speak about what happened, then he's still in control of me. He's from a distance, from the past, still in control of me. And I don't want that. So this is how I'm finding my way through. And I do kind of root it in Judeo-Christian perspective. And that is, I see that God does exist, and that he's the ultimate judge, and that we're going to all have to take an accounting before him. I'm just thankful it's not me. I'm not the judge, because I can't judge this stuff. I just don't find it possible. But he can, and he knows he knows us intimately in a way that I just don't. And I'm leaving it to him. That's how I'm doing it. I'm leaving it to him to deal with what was taken. And some of you just said, well, I lost a lot of money. I lost a lot of money too. Mine stole money from me as well. So yeah, I leave it to him, and I release my right to have things made right in this world, knowing that someday all things will be made right. Even the things that I do will be made right. And I live in that place. That's how I go forward. So I don't have this kind of sweet feelings for him, or wish him well. I just release it. And his punishment is not my burden to bear. To me, that's forgiveness. Forgiveness is I cease seeking my justice. I'm not seeking justice. That's up for life and God to figure that out with him. It's not my job. And that gives me peace for this. Dana, you're asking a great question. Could I get sued? Absolutely, I could get sued. I've seen an attorney. I do know what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. I'm on an edge. I'm on a kind of a dangerous edge, but personally, I don't care. I've not slandered or libel. That's not happening. So everything is true. That's when I tell a falsehood. There's no falsehoods. But does he have a right to privacy? Yeah, he's got some right to privacy. And there's where he could possibly go after me if he could prove that I've affected him financially. That's where he'd have to prove that I've affected him financially. He'd have a hard time doing that. And plus, I'd welcome it because, frankly, if he did that, then all of you would know who he was because he'd have to come forth. You would know his name. It would be in the testimony what actually happened. I would get to roll out all the stuff that I have on him and show pictures and show text messages and all of that lovely stuff. And there's no way he wants that. There's no way he wants to go down on record for forever as being associated to what those things that I have that he's done. So I'm not scared of him. And Dana, if you do want to write, I know a very good attorney that you could speak to help you kind of know your rights and know how to navigate this. Because I think more of us need to stop being afraid. And because by us speaking out, we're then limiting their ability to have free reign. We're saying there are dangerous people and we need to watch out for dangerous people. So I think telling my story and telling other stories like mine, like all of is good because then we are exactly, CJ, we're reclaiming our voice. Absolutely. So that's how I navigate this. All of it is that I heard a friend of mine who's also was in a relationship with a sex addict, like mine claimed he was. I don't think he really was. I think, yes, he used sex as a way to distract himself, but I also think he was just a sexual predator. But anyway, she said, I wish blessings on the person. She said, I want God to bless the person and heal him or her, and more so than me, because if this person was changed in the world, then they would stop harming the world. And, I would have to say that was a very bitter pill for me to swallow because I don't want him to come out ahead of me. Sorry, I don't want him coming out ahead of me. On the other hand, I know that he's not because his lifestyle is killing him. What he's doing is just really harming him. But I do think there's something to that part of it for me is not only seeking justice, but also releasing my desire for his ill will. Because all that happens to me with that is that I just poison myself. And I don't want to poison myself with that. And anybody who's been around me knows that I forget that ever actually kind of happened, really, honestly, other than I make content about it here and I draw from my history here. But it's not something I don't give him any time thinking about that. I just don't waste my life there anymore. I mean, it's 4 years and I feel like it was here's how I know that the trauma bond's gone and that I'm really like free of a lot of the cognitive dissonance is it feels like a very old memory, like an old dream to me. I kind of half forget that it happened. That's how it feels. He's just not that important to me. I just kind of half forget that it happened. And I'm over the money that I've lost and I'm over the way that he's affected my health. I'm just it's a long time. Yeah. So Heather, you feel the same way? I do too. Yeah. So any last questions for me today? This was a tough one. I appreciate you guys all writing through this and really, really sticking to the rules. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Any last questions that you have? Yeah, he's a teaching aid. That's right. I love that. Yeah, exactly. So are they ever happy? No, I don't think narcissists are happy. They're not happy for a lot of reasons. One is because they're terribly afraid of being found out. Can you imagine? So let's just imagine that you're so afraid of someone knowing you that if they knew you, they would reject you. That they would want nothing to do with you. So you must perpetually hide yourself so that you're never known. That's what they're doing. That's what they believe. They may not know they're believing that, but that's the way that they're living. And on top of it, can you imagine living in a world where everybody was so dangerous you couldn't get close to anybody? And that you really didn't like yourself. Ultimately, that you're so filled with loathing that you had to then do this paradoxical solution of saying that you're superior. Jeez, that's misery. I just described misery. So that means you never know anyone. You can never let your guard down. You can never be yourself. That is like sheer horribleness. So no, they're not. Yeah, please, Dana, do message me. No, they're in total. They're in agony. They're in agony. And that's a really great way to end this today. Is that your best revenge is to have a good life. Your best revenge is not living under their tyranny, under their, under their way that they view the world. It's for you to going forth and having a whole wonderful life of your own, because that's something they can't do unless they get a lot of hard work. And most of them will never put in the work to get better. Most of them will not. Yes, Sterling, I do have a YouTube account. It's Kerry McAvoy, Ph.D. It's the same here. And this is being taped for those of you who are on Instagram and TikTok, being taped, and it's going to be up there permanently so you can see this. It's called Are All Narcissists Evil? So let me wrap it up by saying I think narcissists are both evil, and I also think they're mentally ill. I think it's a both question. They're not one thing, they're both. That may not be popular with those that don't believe in evil, but to me, the absence of love and the massive deception is always bad. You can't spell it as being good. So to me, that's evil. Yeah, it is harder when you got kids, for sure, for very, very sure. Next week on Toxic Love on YouTube, I'm talking about what to do when there's children involved. I'm going to kind of outline the issues that most of us have to consider with our kids when we're in a marriage, and also some of your options and how to approach those options. So be on the lookout for that. This week on Toxic Love, we're talking about leaving. How can you leave? And then 2 weeks from now, it will be on the discard, why discard's so painful. So I hope you check it out. Yeah, I really hope that you guys check that out. And be sure, if you guys are trying to struggle healing, you're really looking to take your healing up a notch and get some help kind of dealing with the unresolved anger, leftover guilt, feelings of embarrassment that you're struggling with, maybe even feeling like you can't stop thinking about them, yet being constantly triggered, be sure you check out the Healed and Empowered group coaching. It will be really, really helpful. 12 weeks. It starts at August 31st. Oh, I'm glad this is helpful. Thank you so much. Anything else you guys want to, you like my hair, earrings, and nails. Thank you, Billy. I always have fun with you. And you like the painting? I like it too. I always have fun with you in the audience. I appreciate that. So Scrap Along Mail, you're definitely not afraid you're the David and everyone else. I love that. You're David and everybody else is Goliath. That's great. Yes, it is all the good fight. I appreciate that. And this was fun, guys. I know we talked about it because a lot of you suggested we talk about it. So if you have other topics you'd love to have me talk about, like Kerry, you never talk about whatever. Like I know one that I've not spoken much about is covert narcissism. And I have a feeling that would be really popular. And maybe we should talk about that one. I have talked about sex and narcissism. I mean, it's tricky when you're on TikTok doing that, but if you have other topics you kind of would like me to get, Machiavellianism or like dark triad, I have done that, but we can get back into it. We can also talk more about even psychopathy, so what is psychopathy? How does it look in women versus men? That's also fascinating because women psychopaths and sociopaths are different than male ones are. And you can buy my book on Amazon. I've now, by the way, put my book exclusively in Amazon. So it's both available in Kindle as well as the unlimited Kindle program. Hopefully it should be by now, but also it's available as a hardback and a paperback. So thank you for asking about that. I appreciate it. This was fascinating. I really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. I know it was kind of a short live today. I usually try to keep it an hour, and I know we're not going to come in an hour, but I appreciated it. How to break up with covert narcissistic men. That's a good one. And it's also available as an audio on Audible. Yeah, it is fascinating covert narcissism is really fascinating. And the book title of my book is called Love You More, The Harrowing Tales of Lies, Sex Addiction, and Double Cross. Love You More. The book I referred to a lot, I can't pull up a picture of it because I bought it on Kindle, is by M. Scott Peck, called Glimpses of the Devil. So if you are interested in actually reading a psychiatrist's viewpoint of demon possession, and it is not scary, please don't let it freak you out. It's not scary. He writes it very clinically. So it's a fascinating book, and he talks a lot about the clinical issues involved, the psychology involved, as well as the religion. So very, very interesting. I appreciate that, you guys. All right, I will see you back on Tuesday at 4 p.m. Mine's called Love You More. Love You More. I'll tell you the story. That's a good way to wrap it up. The reason it's called Love You More is because my ex would never tell me I love you. He wouldn't say it. He would say it to me. He would say it to me when he was drunk or asleep. I love you more than you know. He would say to me when he was drunk or asleep. But usually I had to start it by saying, I love you. And then he'd say, love you more. That's what he'd say, love you more. And it was always like, he couldn't just say, I love you too. My late husband would just say, I love you too, or I love you so much, or something like that. No, mine always made it a competition. And then I would say, no, I love you more. And he goes, no, I love you more. And it just got exhausting. And it hit me. What a great way to name the book, because he didn't love me. This guy never loved me at all. This guy it was a con. The whole relationship from start to finish was, in fact, his favorite movie is The Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. I don't know if you guys know the movie. It's with Michael Caine and Steve. I can see his face. Oh, you guys know who I'm talking about. It's on Audible now. You can get it on Audible, and it's on Kindle. Steve Martin and Michael Caine, and they dupe people. They would pair up and dupe people out of money, and that's what he was doing. He had a girlfriend, and he and his girlfriend partnered up and were working together to bilk me out of money. Horrible. I discovered it at the very end. I knew that she was a part of his life. I found that out after we got married, several months in, but it wasn't. I didn't have all the pieces of it until after the fact. But he kind of like, he tipped a scale when I caught a text where him and her were talking about my money. So worrying about my money because my son was ill, worrying that my money was going to go to my care of my son, that they wouldn't be enough for him to have left over. That's how I found out. So then I found out that he and her were meeting up all the way through the marriage, that they would get together at every big juncture, like two people, co-conspirators planning. They would meet up. It was awful. I was horrified when I discovered this. All right, you guys, I will see you on Tuesday. Thank you so much for this. And we will be back and talk about, I'll work on covert narcissism. I'll let you know, because it will be, I always advertise it on YouTube. So if you want to know a day ahead what the topic is, and I'm going to get a little bit better at advertising it here too. But you guys all rock. I appreciate you so much. All right, you guys take care. Bye-bye. Did I say not Dirty Rotten Scoundrels? Yeah, that's the name of the movie. Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. It was his favorite movie. He'd quote lines from it. Now I know why. Because he was taking cues from it. Awful, huh? All right, you take care. Bye-bye.